It seems to me that the bigger the company, the worse it becomes at communicating. Or is it that today our demand for good communication is fed by the ever-present and easy access of social media? Good, true, and persuasive communication is essential. But let's go further than that. Here at the BizVision Conscious Business Academy, our purpose is to encourage good governance, excellence in compliance, good care of people, the community and the environment, and much more. Good conscious businesses do it not because they have to, but because they want to. To get the right reward for such efforts, a company needs to communicate and report its deeds and actions persuasively, effectively, accurately, and truthfully. But how to do that? Well, let me introduce you to one of the UK's leading authorities on corporate reporting, author of the new book, Trust Me, I'm Listed, and the founder and leader of Falcon Windsor. Welcome, Claire Bodanis.
Thank you, Malcolm. It's great to be here.
Lovely to talk to you. Now, before we get into our questions, please tell us what you do and why it's needed.
So, Malcolm, I've worked in corporate communications, specialising in corporate reporting for 20 years now, which is nearly all my career. As a writer, originally, I set up my company, Falcon Windsor, to help clients, which are mostly UK PLC, communicate well with words. And I'm also an associate partner of Dark Angels, which runs creative writing for business courses, and whose philosophy I share, that business writing must be more human. Because without humanity, you cannot connect. Now, the reason I've specialised in reporting, aside from it being the most intellectually stimulating and challenging of corporate communications, is because I believe that good corporate reporting is essential to the workings of a responsible, democratic, capitalist society. I mean, in fact, I talk about myself as an evangelist for reporting. And that's why I was delighted, you mentioned my book, when the Chartered Governance Institute, which is the UK body for company secretaries and governance professionals, asked me to write a book on reporting, which, as you mentioned, is just out now. Trust Me, I'm Listed, Why the Annual Report Matters and How to Do It Well. So in terms of why I think reporting has this role, as the title Trust Me, I'm Listed attests, the annual report is at the heart of the relationship of trust between listed companies and their investors and other stakeholders. It is, or it should be, the source of truth about a business. And in fact, one of my favourite quotes from the book is from a large institutional investor, which if you don't mind, I'll just read to you briefly, who said, and this was unprompted, I may add, the annual report is an essential trust contract between the company and its investors. Now, trust can only be built through openness and honesty. And the idea of honesty and telling the truth is something I believe is more important than ever in today's world of fake news. So how do you determine fact from fiction? Whom do you trust? I believe corporate reporting has an essential role to play in the fight for truth, which is why the annual report matters, to quote the subtitle. But, and here's where the second part of the subtitle comes in, how to do it well. The annual report can only matter if it is done well, by which we mean two things. First, that it's accessible and engaging to its readers because it tells the story of the business as well as ticking the disclosure boxes. And second, that what's in it can be believed because it is audited thoroughly and objectively.
That is truthfully fascinating, Claire, because I remember many years ago, one guy said to me, an analyst, he said, I look at reports and what I try to do is to find out what's missing or what they're hiding.
Yeah.
I said in my opening piece that too many companies communicate poorly, especially in their reports. And I say this allegedly may try to hide or cover up things, just as I pointed out. Surely this must be disappearing fast, thanks to active shareholders and the power of the public. Or is there a long way to go on truthful reporting?
Well, I love that question, Malcolm, because funnily enough, my son, who's 12, said to me the other day, as you can imagine, there are lots of annual reports lying around our house. He said, Mummy, is the reason companies make annual reports so long and boring to hide all the bad stuff they've done?
Right. Out of
So,
the
you know,
mouths of
alluding
children. Yes. Out.
exactly. Now, alluding to what I said before, I don't think this is actually true of most companies, but it's certainly the case that poor communication does make companies look like they're hiding something. But to come back to your point, while there is in many ways no place to hide on the surface, you know, with social media giving an immediacy and a global platform to, you know, just about anything you like, it also means that there is simply a huge amount of noise. We have information and data overload. But information and data are not communication. Good communication is the conveyance of a truthful message, clearly and simply told. And companies that do that well can cut through the noise. But the noise is there and must be cut through.
Mm. Yes, I found it fascinating that again, because I talked to a lot of CEOs on these interviews, and they will record something with me, and later on the PR company will say, oh, that we need that cut out, you can't say that. I said, well, you're already saying it on your website. You know, there's a lot of disjointed thinking at times. I like your saying that if you understand why you're doing something, you'll do it better. Do leaders really understand, or do they still do things that simply look good on a report?
Well, that's an interesting question, because doing things that look good in the report isn't, in my view, the problem with reporting. Rather, what leads to poor reporting is the starting point of this is a regulatory exercise in disclosure and we need to tick the boxes. That's what results in unreadable, disjointed reporting. I mean, not least because the regulations don't lend themselves to a coherent and logical flow. Now, I just want to read you a short bit from one of the investor interviews I did in the book, which, and I think this is really interesting coming from an investor who you might think just wants people to meet disclosure. He says, companies have to throw off the mindset of blindly sticking to the requirements because these don't help you communicate. In fact, they do the opposite and prevent you from writing your own story. So I think that's really interesting coming from an investor. So those who approach reporting in the way of ticking the boxes have forgotten the purpose behind it, which is to explain yourselves clearly and thus engender trust with your investors and your other stakeholders. And that's the thing that I think leaders need to remember. They need to remember why they're doing it, and that will lead to better, indeed good, reporting.
Claire, that's a very, very important lesson that you've just given there to leaders. COVID-19's brought big changes in many ways, with companies facing new judgments, and not just from its shareholders, but from its people, customers and suppliers. Do you see this sea change continuing, and how do you think it will impact on corporate reporting?
I think what's been really interesting is that when we went into this crisis, investors did actually ask companies to do a certain number of things. They said, you know, consider your employees, look after your employees, take care about how much you pay yourselves, directors, and also take a hard look at the dividend, particularly obviously if companies were taking government money and furloughing staff. And actually that's interesting that that was an investor view. What we have then since seen during, as this has unfolded over the last 6 months, companies are doing many more trading updates than they have done before. And also the quarterly reports have been somewhat different in nature to previous years. They've been far more sort of detailed and discursive and open. They've been far more open in what they've been saying about the challenges and what's going on with employees and other things, not just the sort of financial and operational stuff that you might expect a company to talk about. So certainly in communication thus far, I believe COVID's had an important and useful role in making companies be more open and honest. And I think the reason for that is, if you think about it, that when companies can get away with not being honest about things that people don't know much about, right? We are all as expert as one another in COVID and what's going on. So you can't, you know, hide or be dishonest in some ways around that. You have to be open about it because people can call your bluff. And I think that actually will lead you in when it comes to the annual reports that are coming out this year, there'll be far more scrutiny on them and what they're actually saying, because we all want to know what's going on and how companies are responding and what their plans are. There'll be much more scrutiny, but I think as a result, there'll also be more honesty as well. In fact, I hope so.
Yeah. You must be an expert at reading between the lines. Our Conscious Business Academy is not just about mindfulness, but we say consciousness is about a business being aware of the impact of its actions and activity, and genuinely wanting to be a better business. So how should such a business go about reporting such consciousness without being seen to be glib or trend following? How should they be telling their changed story?
I think it's about two things, Malcolm. You need to be honest and you need to be open. And they are different. You can say something that is true or present a piece of accurate data, but it falls far short of the whole truth, the openness part, because it doesn't tell the full story. And there is a reason that regulators, actually reporting regulators, talk about openness as well as honesty, about telling a story as well as presenting facts. Because while you can be honest without being open, you can't be open without being honest. And the reason this is as important as one another, that openness is as important as honesty, and together they create truth, is because it goes to the heart of the purpose, or communicating more broadly, in fact, which is to engender trust. Now, language is really important here. I mean, you might expect me to say that as a writer, but I think it's true. If you read an annual report, it's actually quite easy to tell when people are hiding something or other communications. Honesty has a kind of refreshing feel about it. But remember, and I think companies need to remember this, engaging statements about intent must be matched with action, which is where reporting is so important. You can't have openness without honesty, in a sense, the sort of story, but no facts. They must be matched with evidence. Statements of intent must be matched with evidence or proof that the intent is real. So, for example, if you were to say, our people's safety is our highest priority, you need to prove that in what actually happens, not least in directors' remuneration, for example, which, if this statement is true, their remuneration would be based on safety targets as well as financial ones. So it's about those two things, honesty and openness, which together create that truth.
Another great lesson. One of our BVTV channels is called Prosper Beyond Brexit, both a podcast and a TV channel. Now, listeners and viewers are constantly telling us that because of their frustrations over uncertainty, deal, no deal, and so on, they feel the result will mean that they will have to furlough their good governance efforts in order to survive. Now, you quite rightly, I think, argue that it would make more sense to go the opposite way and raise their governance standards. What makes you say that?
Well, over the years, we've seen that in crises, there tends to be a flight to quality. People are far more careful to spend their money on things that are valuable. So holding on to the important things is crucial. And the whole point of good governance, this comes back to the why. What is good governance there for? It's there to protect what matters. And it's to protect what's important, so that you have a business both in the short term and in the longer term. So good governance is about risk management as much as anything else. And it's arguably those companies who've managed their businesses well and therefore have good governance, who've been able to weather the storms of the past 6 months or so better than the competitors who haven't. And those with poorer governance that are finding themselves in difficulties now.
Back to our conscious business purpose, you advocate real rigor in ESG, environment, social and governance reporting, which I totally agree, as it can truly set a business apart. What other benefits do you see in such rigorous reporting?
Well, rigor in environmental, social and governance matters is arguably simply a better understanding of your business environment. And one of the most fundamental aspects of rigorous reporting, which people often forget in their focus on investors and other audiences, is the internal benefit. the self as the audience. If you don't mind, Malcolm, I'm just going to read a short passage from the book, which is precisely about this point, because I think
Great.
it is absolutely fundamental. For companies, a perhaps counterintuitive advantage of having shareholders, and with them demands for extensive, detailed, high-quality reporting, is that it forces those companies to report extensively, in detail, with quality, to themselves. This self-reporting is something that we as people are notoriously bad at. We are all riddled with bias and have a tendency to focus more on the things we want to, while pushing to one side this or that ominous piece of paper or unappetizing possibility, and we leave booking the dentist appointment for later. For these reasons, accountability is generally a good in and of itself, even on the individual level. We are all better managers of ourselves when there's someone else watching over us. Now, companies are no different. And as they and their groups become ever larger and more complex, the benefit of having an annual process that gathers together all current material information, welcome and unwelcome, I want to stress that, unwelcome as well, in a single document of record becomes greater and greater. Annual reports enable segmented departments to share information and improve their basic awareness of each other, and give department leaders an opportunity to provide crucial feedback. And while companies do, of course, have internal reporting mechanisms for precisely these purposes, the fact that the annual report is published gives it extra potency to that special someone watching over me effect. This can be particularly beneficial for directors who may rarely write their own reports, but do, we hope, read them, because after all, they do have to sign them off.
Really interesting, isn't it? Many of the aspects we're talking about in good reporting can be delivered without measurement. Do you see an increasing demand for transparency and benchmarking in reporting so that report readers can see the journey taken by a company and what it needs to continue to do that journey? If so, how do you see that being persuasively presented in a report without complicated jargon?
It's a great question, and obviously speaks right to the heart of me as a writer. And funnily enough, when I was putting together this book, we originally planned to have a reporting jargon section at the end, like an appendix that people could go and look at. And I was actually very, very pleased when my non-technical reader, who I asked to read it and say, can you spot the jargon, please? Because after a while you become blind to it yourself. He actually couldn't find any. Right? And what that tells me, and the reason I mention that, is because reporting doesn't need jargon. Right? And that is one of the fundamental things that people need to understand if they are to do reporting well. You need to communicate in simple, clear language. That doesn't mean, of course, that complex things can't be talked about. I mean, complex things can be discussed in simple language. And that doesn't mean also that in certain areas of the business where you would expect a specialist knowledge, that you can't use technical terms. But the fundamentals of an annual report, which are to explain your business to a wide audience, should be able to be done without jargon. And it is simply a writing and a linguistic exercise.
Brilliant, yes. We need to communicate that more to us people in marketing and on IT as well. Claire?
Well, chapter 4 of the book is all about how to do that.
I've got it. And by the way, the URL behind me showing where you can get it.